Hello, residents of Inkwell Isle. I am WyrdBean, and this is WyrdLore about Cuphead, the delicious last course. In my previous Cuphead video, someone pointed out something critical that I completely missed. Let me just show you these two lines real quick. Chef Saltbaker warns you to stay on your guard and tells you, like any good recipe, heart and soul is the secret ingredient. We'll come back to these lines later. You see, I pointed out that every new boss is a victim, but if they are victims, why were they protecting the ingredients for the Wonder Tart? Let's take a look at each of these bosses and their ingredients. First is the Moonshine Mob, who gives you distillery dough. Did you know that before we had such things as instant yeast and chemical leaveners, people would get yeast from distilleries to make their food? In the second phase of the fight, a moonshine barrel dances across the screen. In this phase, we fight a moth woman who has clearly been inspired by the 1938 cartoon Moth in the Flame, in which the moth fights a natural force, fire. Why didn't we just ask the Moonshine Mob for their distillery dough? Well, yeast is an important source of nutrients for a lot of insects, and as shown in the background, there is an entire city of insects that needed food. This city of insects, like the 1938 cartoon, is battling a natural force, hunger. It's possible that by taking this dough, we disrupted a delicate ecosystem. Now you can probably understand why they didn't want to give it up. Then, we have Esther Winchester, who we've already discussed in my previous video. She gives you desert limes. If you watched my previous video, you know that she has a history of violent abuse and neglect. If you watch her face throughout the fight, you'll realize that she is actually having fun, as she's always smiling. It would seem she doesn't actually care about the desert limes and just wants to fight. Now for the weirdest bosses. The third boss we encounter is the Howling Aces, who gives us pineapple mint. This plant is native to Western Europe. Now look at the boss. This is clearly a literal representation of a dogfight. And look at the type of plane he flies. In World War II, the British Bulldog was a mascot for the Royal Air Force. This is actually really important as we begin to uncover a deeper meaning in the story of Cuphead. But let's save that for later. The Howling Aces didn't want to give up the ingredient because they knew Saltbaker was evil, just like the Royal Air Force knew they needed to weaken the Germans, despite how controversial the decision was. The fourth boss we encounter is Mortimer Freeze. Now we already know that each boss in the game exemplifies the duality of innocence and corruption. Mortimer has created his snow monster, which he can no longer control. I was shocked when I realized the snow monster in this fight is identical to the Snowman 1933. Watch as the snowman quickly goes mad. This cartoon led me to something amazing, but we will go back to that in a minute. Mortimer Freeze doesn't want to give you the icy sugary cubes, not because of greed, but because he's afraid of the power of this ingredient getting into the wrong hands. The final boss is Glumstone the Giant, who gives us gnome berries. You might have seen this cartoon before, but Glumstone was inspired by The Brave Little Tailor 1938. In this cartoon, we see Mickey is battling a giant armed with a pair of scissors. Just like in this cartoon, it seems that Glumstone doesn't possess a high intellect. He is a character that kings fear, a man restricted by no law. All of these bosses represent lawless characters that a king, ruler, or dictator would hate. And it's fun to see what might have inspired them. Wait a second, is that the night that we fight in one of the king's minigames? Let's listen to what he whispers to the king here.
The recipe has 7 ingredients.
7?
That was oddly specific. I thought it was just a coincidence, and that's because it is. But it led me to this. The Wonder Tart Chef Saltbaker is baking is supposed to take 5 ingredients. But what if it took 7? Just as Mickey had lied about the 7 giants,
I killed 7 with 1 blow! 7!
Saltbaker was lying about the 7 ingredients. So let's now take a look at what the ingredients mean. Is it a coincidence that there is also 7 deadly sins? No. The concept of the 7 deadly sins actually originates from Evagrius Ponticus, who created the 8 evil thoughts. Evagrius said, "A man in chains cannot run, nor can the mind that is enslaved to passion see the place of spiritual prayer." Chef Saltbaker had succumbed to the 7 deadly sins. When Chef Saltbaker is arrested and sent to a court where Judge Wise the Owl sentenced him to community service, look at the date on the papers Judge Wise is holding. 1934. This is said to be one of the worst years of the Great Depression. Hitler declared himself the ultimate ruler, Stalin began his massacres, and Mao spread the communist doctrine. Remember the British Bulldog I talked about earlier? Inkwell is on the brink of a catastrophic war that will change its setting forever. Dictators such as the Devil and Saltbaker have begun to rise up in the pursuit of a new world where they are in control. And the only thing stopping them is you and the bosses we defeat. These dictators have manipulated us into harming our allies, just as the dictators of 1934 had used fear and prejudice to manipulate people. So what are the 2 ingredients Chef Saltbaker withholds? Well, he tells you at the beginning of the DLC, heart and soul. These are the things that you need to sacrifice to become ruler of the world. Expertly pointed out by a commenter in my previous video, each character in this base game represents different sins, but what they missed is that is actually different in the DLC. How many main leaders were there during World War II? You guessed it, 7. Rootin' Tootin' Esther is America's Franklin Roosevelt. Howling Aces is the British Bulldog, Winston Churchill. Glumstone and his army of fascist gnomes is Benito Mussolini, who famously had an ulcer in his stomach. Moonshine Mob is Chiang Kai-shek, who fought for democracy in China in a civil war against the Communist Party. Italian mobsters clearly inspired the art for this fight, who also battled the Communist Party. The mastermind snail that tricks you is the snails that saved Chiang from an attack planned by the communists by infecting them with a parasite called schistosoma. Angel and Demon are clearly hero. This needs no explanation. That leaves the snowman and Chef Saltbaker. Remember the snowman I showed you earlier? Well, take a look at this scene. It happens to also be the exact background from Chef Saltbaker's Phase 3. That's because Mortimer Freeze is Joseph Stalin, who was sided with Germany until they invaded. Thank you for watching, guys. I really think I hit the mark on this one. Let me know if you guys had similar thoughts about the story of the new DLC, and if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe so that I know that you want more. Bye.